The university atrium was the kind of place that felt like the heart of everything and the center of nothing, all at once. It was a giant glass and stone box, flooded with pale, watery light, even on a gray afternoon. People moved through it in constant, buzzing stream, students lugging backpacks that seemed heavier than they were. Professors with purposeful strides, friends laughing in little clusters that drifted from one bench to another. The sound was a low, steady hum of 100 conversations. The scrape of chair legs, the hiss of the coffee machine from the corner cart. In the very center of this chaos sat a beautiful, dark wood grand piano. A small, polished brass plaque on it said it was a gift from the class of 1998. It was meant to be an invitation, a symbol of culture. Most people treated it like fancy furniture. They'd rest a coffee cup on its closed lid or pile their coats on the bench next to it. Sometimes a first-year music student would brave the space and play a hesitant, mistake-filled version of a pop song, their face red, rushing off before the last note finished. In the far corner, tucked into a window alcove, as if trying to become part of the wall, sat a young woman. She worked at the library help desk, and she was on her break. Her name was Elena, but no one in this flowing crowd knew that. To them, she was just another student, maybe a little quieter than most. She had a notebook open in front of her, but she wasn't writing. She was watching the piano. Her hands were in her lap, hidden under the small table. If you looked closely, you'd see her fingers were moving slightly, pressing down in a complex silent pattern on her knees. They were strong fingers with short, neat nails and pads that were not soft, but had a slight, smooth firmness to them. They were not the hands of someone who texted all day. They were the hands of someone who had spent thousands of hours doing one very specific, very difficult thing. Elena was doing it now, in her mind. She was playing, not the simple pop songs or the basic classical pieces people expected. In her head, she was running through passages of music that were like storms and whispers, like falling down a mountain and then floating back up. The music in her mind was so loud, so vivid, it almost drowned out the atrium's noise, but only almost. The real world always crept back in. The smell of burnt coffee, the sharp echo of a laugh, the sight of someone tossing a bag carelessly onto the piano bench. Each time this happened, a little flinch went through her, and the music in her head would stutter and stop. She'd look down at her own hands, now still, and a hollow feeling would open up in her chest. It had been a year. A year since she had walked out of the practice room at the conservatory, closed the door softly behind her, and just kept walking. She hadn't made a big scene. There was no dramatic breakdown. It was quieter than that, and worse. It was like a light inside her had just flickered out. The pressure, the endless comparisons, the feeling that her worth was tied to every single note, it had all built up into a wall of silence. Playing, the thing she had loved since she was a small child reaching up to the keys, had become a source of pure fear. The thought of performing made her throat close up. So she left. She came here, to this big, anonymous university, and got a job reshelving books. It was peaceful in the library. The books didn't judge. They didn't expect a flawless performance. They just were. But the piano in the atrium called to her. Every day on her break, she would sit in this same spot. It was a kind of painful torture she put herself through. She would watch other people ignore it, abuse it, or play it badly. And she would think, I could show you. I could make it sing. I could make this whole noisy room stop and listen. But the thought was always followed by the cold grip of fear. What if she froze? What if her hands shook? What if, after all this time, the magic was truly gone? What if she sat down and nothing came out but a weak, wrong note? That would be worse than never playing at all. It would be proof that the part of her that was a pianist was dead. so she stayed in her alcove. A ghost of her former self, haunting her own life, she watched as a group of business students, loud and confident in their crisp shirts, took over a large table near the piano. They were talking about a charity event, waving clipboards, full of an energy that felt alien to her. Their leader, a guy with an easy smile who seemed to know everyone, was directing things. He had the kind of voice that carried without him trying to shout. Elena pulled her sweater sleeves down over her hands. She tried to focus on her notebook. She doodled in the margin little spirals that looked like musical clefs. The noise of the atrium seemed to grow louder, pushing in on her. For a moment, she considered just getting up and going back to the library early, back to the quiet rows of books. But something held her there. It was the piano. The afternoon light had shifted, and a single sunbeam, fighting through the clouds, had found the polished lid. It gleamed, a quiet island of beauty in the chaos. It looked, for the first time, like it was waiting. Not for just anyone. For the right person. Elena's heart gave a hard, single thump against her ribs. She looked at her hands, hidden in the sleeves of her sweater. She slowly pulled them out and laid them flat on the table. She studied the faint lines on her palms, the subtle strength in her fingers. These hands knew what to do. They remembered. Even if her mind was full of fear, her muscles, her nerves, they held the memory of the music. The loud group by the piano laughed at something. The sound jarred her. She closed her eyes, taking a deep, slow breath. She didn't need to play for them. She didn't need to play for anyone. What if, just for 1 minute, she played for herself? What if she just walked over, sat down, and played one single perfect chord? Just to feel it? Just to remember the vibration in the wood, the way the sound could travel up through your fingers and into your bones? It was a dangerous thought. A tiny crack in the wall she had built. She opened her eyes. The leader of the business group was looking around the atrium, his eyes scanning the crowd. He was looking for something. His gaze passed over her, then swept back. He looked at her, then at the piano, then back at her. A plan seemed to click into place on his face. He said something to his friends, picked up his clipboard, and started walking. He was walking straight toward her. Elena's breath hitched. The hollow feeling in her chest turned into a fluttering panic. She looked down quickly, pretending to be engrossed in her doodles. But she could hear his footsteps getting closer. She could feel his approach like a change in the air pressure. He stopped in front of her table. She made herself look up. "Hi there," he said, his smile friendly but busy. "Sorry to bother you. We're setting up for a charity drive, flash mob thing. Trying to get some atmosphere going." He gestured with his thumb back toward the piano. "You look like you might be a piano person? Or, I don't know, an artsy person? We just need a little something simple in the background while we get organized. Could you help us out? Just play something super basic? Like, I don't know, chopsticks? Or just some scales? Anything, really? For like 5 minutes?" His words hung in the air between them. Super basic, chopsticks, scales. They were the most innocent words in the world. But to Elena, they felt like a key turning in a lock she had thrown away the key for. He saw a quiet girl who might know a few notes. He didn't see a musician. He didn't see the years, the sweat, the tears, the calluses, the silent, screaming passion that was sitting right in front of him. The old fear rose up, a cold wave telling her to say no, to mumble an excuse, to vanish. But underneath it, that spark from earlier, the one that had flared when she saw the sun on the piano caught. It was fed by a sudden, quiet, and fierce sense of injustice. Not at him, but at herself. At the version of herself that hid in corners and let her gift gather dust. He was still smiling, waiting for an answer. The whole noisy atrium seemed to hold its breath. Elena looked past him, at the piano. It gleamed in its spotlight of sun. She looked down at her own hands, resting on the table. They didn't look like much, but they knew. She didn't speak. She simply nodded, a small, tight movement of her head. Pushing her chair back, she stood up. The guy with the clipboard looked relieved. Awesome. Thanks a ton. Seriously, just anything simple. We're not really listening, just need the vibe, you know? He gave her another quick, distracted smile and turned back to his friends. Already calling out instructions about where to put the donation boxes. His words, "Just need the vibe," floated in the air behind him as she walked away from the safety of her alcove. The distance to the piano felt much longer than it was. It was like crossing a wide, empty stage with 1,000 hidden eyes watching, even though most people were still busy with their own lives. She felt her heartbeat in her ears, a dull, rushing sound that mixed with the noise of the atrium. Her legs felt stiff, but they carried her forward. With each step, the fear buzzed louder. Asterisk, what are you doing? You can't do this. Turn around. Say you feel sick. Asterisk, but another part, a part that had been buried in silence for a year, was waking up. It was a stubborn, quiet voice that simply said, asterisk, just sit down. Just put your hands on the keys. That's all. Asterisk, the piano bench was slightly pushed out. Someone's scarf was draped over the end of it. She carefully picked up the scarf, a soft gray wool, and folded it neatly on the floor beside the bench. The simple, normal action helped steady her for a second. She looked at the piano keys, a sea of black and white, familiar and terrifying. She sat down. The bench was at the wrong height. The last person who'd used it must have been much taller. Without even thinking, her hands went to the sides of the bench, her fingers finding the small levers underneath. She gave a firm push, and with a smooth, practiced motion, slid the bench back and then forward, adjusting it to the perfect position for her. It was a movement she'd done 10,000 times before. A musician's habit. The feel of the wooden bench gliding on the floor was a physical memory, a piece of her old life clicking back into place. She placed her hands in her lap for a moment, taking a slow breath. She could smell the faint, clean scent of the polished wood and a hint of old dust from inside the piano. It was a smell she loved. The leader of the business group was only a few feet away, talking loudly to a friend. Yeah, just got some random girl to tinkle around. It'll be fine. Tinkle around. The words should have hurt, but they didn't. They just made that quiet, stubborn feeling inside her grow stronger. It wasn't anger. It was more like a decision being made. She would not tinkle. She lifted the fallboard, the cover for the keys. It moved without a sound. The full keyboard was revealed. She stretched her hands out, not to play, but just to hover over the keys. Her fingers trembled, just a little. She curled them, then stretched them out again. She thought about playing chopsticks. It would be so easy. 2 fingers, a silly little tune. It would fulfill his request. She could do it and then leave. No one would look twice, but then she looked at her hands. Really looked at them. She saw the slight curve of her fingers, ready for the shape of a chord. She saw the strength in her wrists. These hands had practiced for 8 hours a day. They had learned languages made of sound. They had expressed joy and sadness and fury, all through these black and white keys. They didn't know how to tinkle. The noisy atrium seemed to fade for a second. A memory flashed, clear and bright. She was 9 years old, sitting at her first real piano, a big scarred upright in her teacher's living room. The teacher, an old woman with kind eyes, had just played a piece for her. It was a powerful, stormy, beautiful thing. This, her teacher had said, her old hands resting on the keys, is music that tells the truth. It's not always pretty, but it's always real. One day, you'll tell your truth with it. She hadn't thought of that in years. The truth was, she was scared. The truth was, she missed this more than anything. The truth was, she felt like a ghost. That was the truth she had been living. But maybe there was another truth underneath, one that was waiting to be played. Her mind, trained for so long, flicked through pieces. Not the simple ones, the real ones, the true ones. It landed on one. It was a piece she had loved as a teenager, one she had poured all her teenage angst and passion into. It was big. It was demanding. It was, frankly, way too much for a crowded atrium at 3 p.m. It was perfect. A new kind of calm settled over her. The nervous fluttering didn't go away, but it moved to the background. This was no longer about the guy with the clipboard, or the charity event, or the people in the atrium. This was between her and the piano. A conversation they needed to have. A truth that needed to be told, even if only for herself. She placed her feet on the pedals, feeling their familiar resistance. She settled her weight on the bench, her back straight but not stiff. She raised her hands. For a final second, she hesitated. This was the point of no return. Playing chopsticks was safe. Playing this was like jumping off a cliff. She let her hands fall. The first sound wasn't a melody. It was a deep, rolling chord. It wasn't just loud. It was full. It was a sound that had weight and darkness and power. It came from the very bottom of the piano, a low, thunderous growl that vibrated through the floor and up through the legs of the bench. The conversation at the table right next to her stopped in the middle of a word. So if we just, boom, the guy with the clipboard froze, his pen poised over a checklist. He turned his head slowly toward the piano. She didn't see him. Her eyes were fixed on a point somewhere inside the piano. Her hands, which had seemed so still and small a moment ago, were now alive. They flew from the deep bass notes up to the middle of the keyboard, a crashing, discordant, and absolutely intentional wave of sound. It was the sound of a storm gathering. It was impossible to ignore that the hum of the atrium didn't just quiet down. It was sliced through. All across the wide space, heads turned. Someone holding a coffee cup paused halfway to their mouth. A student wearing headphones pulled one ear off, frowning. The loud group of friends by the window stopped laughing. She played the opening section with a fierce, controlled strength. This was not pretty background music. This was a declaration. Every crashing chord was a shout. Every rapid run of notes up the keyboard was a question. Her body moved with the music, not in a showy way, but naturally a lean into a powerful passage, a slight recoil as her hands crossed. Her face, which had been pale and closed, was now focused, intense. There was a faint line of concentration between her brows. The guy with the clipboard just stared, his mouth slightly open. This was not tinkling. This was a force of nature. He looked from her flying hands to her face, trying to connect the quiet girl from the corner with this person who was commanding the entire room. The music shifted. The stormy opening gave way to something quieter, but somehow even more tense. A single haunting melody line began in her right hand, over a restless, rumbling left hand. It was lonely. It was beautiful and sad. The anger was gone, replaced by a deep, aching melancholy. This was the part that always got her. It felt like the music was pulling something out of her, something she had locked away. Her expression softened, the intensity melting into something more vulnerable. For the first time, she blinked, as if coming back to the room a little. She saw the blur of faces in her peripheral vision, all turned toward her. The old fear tried to whisper, look at all these people. Stop now. But it was too late. The music had her. She was in the middle of the story now, and she had to see it through. Her hands moved on their own, trained by years of muscle memory, and now fueled by a real, raw feeling she hadn't let herself feel in so long. This was her truth. It was messy and stormy and sad, and it was hers. She played on, and the atrium was utterly, completely silent. No one coughed. No one shuffled their feet. They were all holding their breath, caught in the spell of the storm and the sadness pouring from the girl they'd all walked past 100 times. The girl who was finally playing. The final, thunderous chord of the opening section hung in the air of the atrium, a physical thing that seemed to push against the glass walls. In the absolute silence that followed, you could hear the faint, mechanical hum of the building's air system for the first time all day. Every single person was turned toward the piano. It wasn't a gradual thing. It was as if a magnet had yanked all their attention at once. The student who had been rushing to class late was now standing still just inside the main doors, backpack slipping off one shoulder. The two baristas behind the coffee cart had stopped wiping counters and were leaning forward, elbows on the metal surface, their eyes wide. The group of friends who had been laughing were statues, frozen in mid-motion. The guy with the clipboard, the one who had asked for simple, felt his own clipboard slip from his fingers. It clattered to the floor, a sharp, shocking sound in the quiet. He didn't even look down. He just stared. He wasn't looking at a girl playing piano anymore. He was watching an artist at work. He saw her whole body leaning into the instrument, not just her hands. He saw the deliberate, powerful curve of her back as she drew the deep sounds from the bass notes. He saw the absolute certainty in her movements. There was no hesitation, no searching for keys. This was not someone remembering a piece. This was someone channeling it. The music shifted. The storm passed, leaving behind a strange, unsettled calm. The melody that came now was slow, sorrowful, and incredibly beautiful. It was a lonely voice singing in a vast, empty space. Her right hand shaped each note with a tenderness that made your heart ache. Her left hand kept up a soft, restless ripple underneath, like a quiet worry that wouldn't go away. A girl sitting at a nearby table, who had been texting, slowly put her phone face down on the table. She didn't want the glow of the screen to interfere with the moment. She just watched, her chin resting in her hand, her eyes beginning to feel a little watery. She didn't know why. The music just touched something deep inside her, a place words couldn't reach. An old man, a professor with a worn leather satchel, had been walking along the upper balcony. He stopped at the railing, his hand gripping the cold metal. He knew this piece. He had heard it performed in concert halls. To hear it here, in the middle of a busy afternoon, played not just correctly, but with such raw feeling. It was disorienting and magnificent. He peered down at the top of the young woman's head, trying to place her. Was she a graduate student in music? He didn't recognize her. The level of skill was staggering. Down on the main floor, the atmosphere had changed from shock to a kind of collective holding of breath. People weren't just hearing a performance. They were witnessing something private and powerful being made public. They felt like they were peeking through a keyhole into someone's soul. No one dared to move. A cough was swallowed. A chair leg squeaked and its owner winced as if they'd committed a crime. She was in another world. The atrium, the people, the gray light, it had all dissolved. She was inside the music. Her face, which had been tight with concentration, had softened. The fierce line was gone from her brow. Now there was just a deep, sad focus. Her eyes were open, but they weren't seeing the keys. They were looking at some memory, some feeling the music was pulling out of her. The sorrowful melody grew, building in strength. It wasn't a cry of despair. It was a cry of longing. For what? She probably couldn't even say. For the past. For the version of herself that could do this without fear. For the pure love of the sound before it got tangled up with pressure and judgment. It all poured into the notes. Her fingers, which could be so strong and forceful, now caressed the keys, pulling out a sound that was warm and velvety and full of loss. Then the storm returned. But it was different now. It wasn't just crashing anger. It was mixed with the sadness. It was a turbulent, chaotic battle between the two feelings. Her hands became a blur again, flying across the keys, crossing over each other in a complex dance. The volume swelled, filling every corner of the huge space. It was loud, but it wasn't noise. It was every messy, complicated human emotion turned into sound. A first-year student, sitting alone and feeling homesick, felt a single tear trace a hot path down his cheek. He quickly wiped it away, embarrassed, but then he saw the girl next to him doing the same thing. They shared a quick, shaky smile. They weren't alone in whatever this music was making them feel. The guy who had dropped his clipboard finally bent down to pick it up, his movements slow, like he was underwater. He stood back up, clutching it to his chest. His earlier confidence, his busy, chatty energy was completely gone. He felt small. He felt like he had accidentally knocked on a simple door and stumbled into a cathedral. He watched her, and a hot flush of shame washed over him for his "just need the vibe" comment. This wasn't a vibe. This was a heart, beating right out in the open. The piece was moving toward its end. The music became grander, more dramatic. It was a final struggle, a last, powerful statement. She played a series of chords that marched up the keyboard, each one higher and more defiant than the last. Her posture was perfect, her arms moving with a strength that seemed impossible for her frame. She was putting every bit of herself into these final moments, the lost year, the fear, the hope, the love that had never really died. She reached the final famous chords. They are slow, heavy, and final. Boom, a pause, hanging in the silence. Boom, another pause, even longer. She lifted her hands high, and with emotion that was both delicate and full of finality, brought them down for the last deep, resonant note. It rang out. And then there was nothing, just the pure, vibrating silence that follows a great noise. Her hands stayed on the keys for a second, feeling the last tremor of the string fade away under her fingers. Then, slowly, she let them fall into her lap. She was breathing a little heavily, as if she had just run a long way. She blinked, slowly, coming back to the room. She saw the dark wood of the piano in front of her. She became aware of her body again, the hard bench beneath her, the cool hair on her face. And then she became aware of the silence. It was a thick, alive silence. It was the silence of 100 people not making a sound. A prickling heat rushed up her neck to her ears. She didn't dare look up. The fear came crashing back, 10 times worse than before. What had she done? She had played that piece, here, for everyone. It was too much. It was showing off. They must think she's insane. Her heart, which had been pounding with the music, now pounded with panic. She wanted to get up and run. Just bolt from the bench and disappear into the library stacks forever. But before she could move, the silence broke. It started with one person, over by the window. It was a single, clear, solid clap. Then another joined in. And another. It wasn't wild cheering, not at first. It was a wave of slow, sincere, deep applause that spread across the atrium like a warm tide. It was the kind of applause that isn't just polite. It's respectful. It's grateful. The sound of it washed over her. She flinched, as if it were a physical touch. Slowly, so slowly, she lifted her head. She saw them then. All of them. Standing, sitting, leaning over the balcony, all looking at her. Their faces weren't mocking or confused. They were amazed, moved. A few people were even wiping their eyes. The girl from the nearby table was smiling at her, giving her a thumbs up. The old professor on the balcony was clapping steadily, nodding his head. The guy with the clipboard was just standing there, clapping too, a look of pure disbelief on his face. She didn't know what to do. Her mind was empty. So she did the only thing that felt natural. She gave a small, awkward nod of her head, a pianist's instinctual acknowledgement. It wasn't a bow, just a tiny dip of her chin. The applause grew louder, warmer. Someone whistled. A voice called out, "Bravo!" In the middle of that warm noise, she met the eyes of the guy with the clipboard. He stopped clapping. He took a step toward her, then another, closing the gap he had created when he'd walked away from her table just a few minutes before. A lifetime ago. He reached her, standing by the side of the piano. The applause was still going, but between them, it felt quiet. He opened his mouth, closed it, and tried again. His voice was hushed, just for her to hear, completely stripped of its earlier casual confidence. He started. He shook his head, a small, bewildered motion. "I had no idea. I am so sorry. That was incredible." She looked at him, at his honest, stunned face, and then at the sea of people still clapping. The fear was still there, buzzing in the background. But on top of it, rising like the first notes of a new song, was something else. Something she hadn't felt in a very, very long time. It was the feeling of being seen. Not as a quiet girl in the corner. Not as a former student who'd given up, but as a pianist. The applause didn't stop. It just changed. It warmed, swelled, and wrapped around her like a blanket. The initial shock from the crowd had melted into something else: admiration, respect, and a shared feeling of having witnessed a small, perfect miracle in an ordinary day. They weren't clapping for a show. They were clapping for the courage it took to play like that, right here, right now. She stayed on the bench, feeling unsteady. The guy with the clipboard was still standing there, his apology hanging in the air between them. She managed a small, tight nod, accepting his words, but not knowing what to say back. Her mind was a jumble. The roar of the music was gone, replaced by the roar of the clapping, and underneath it all, a deep, trembling exhaustion. It felt like she had run for miles. People started to move. Not away, but closer. A few students from nearby tables got up and took tentative steps toward the piano. They weren't trying to crowd her. They just wanted to be near the source of what had just happened. An older woman, a staff member who had been collecting trash, wheeled her cart a little closer and gave her a slow, approving smile. Then, a new figure broke through the loose circle that was forming. It was the old professor from the balcony. He had come down the stairs, his leather satchel swinging at his side. He had a kind face, lined with years, and sharp, intelligent eyes that were now fixed on her with a look of deep curiosity. The crowd seemed to sense his purpose, and a path opened for him almost without anyone meaning it to. He stopped a few feet from the piano, waiting for a break in the applause, which was finally beginning to soften into a patter. He didn't say anything at first. He just looked at her, then at the piano, then back at her. "That," he said finally. His voice was quiet, but carried easily. It was a voice used to lecturing, but there was no lecture in it now. Just wonder. That was Sergei Rachmaninoff. Prelude in C-sharp minor. It wasn't a question. He was naming the truth, placing the wild emotional storm she had created into the real world. She nodded again, her throat too tight to speak. "I have heard that piece performed many times," he continued, taking a step closer. He didn't smile, but his eyes were gentle. "By professionals with famous names. I have rarely heard it played with such personal conviction. Not in a concert hall. Certainly not here. He gestured around at the atrium, the coffee cart, the scattered backpacks. Who are you? The simple question felt huge. Who was she? An hour ago, she was the library assistant on her break. A few minutes ago, she was the girl hiding in the alcove. Now, she was the person who had done this. I used to study, she said. Her voice came out as a croak. She cleared her throat. At the conservatory. I don't anymore. Why not? The question was direct, but not harsh. He sounded genuinely confused, as if someone had told him a brilliant painter had decided to never touch a brush again. She looked down at her hands, still resting in her lap. They were trembling slightly. I stopped. He was silent for a moment, watching her. He seemed to understand that the full story wasn't for this crowded, public moment. He reached into the inside pocket of his jacket and pulled out a simple, cream-colored business card. He held it out to her. My name is on this, he said. I teach in the music department here. History and theory, mostly. But I know everyone. And I know talent that is too big to be left. Stopped. He paused, making sure she was looking at him. You come and see me. Whenever you are ready. No pressure. We'll just talk. About music. About Rachmaninoff. About whatever you like. She reached out and took the card. The paper felt thick and important between her fingers. She looked at the neat printing. His name, his title, a phone number. An office building she passed every day on her way to the library. Thank you, she whispered. He gave her a final, firm nod, then turned and began to walk away, melting back into the crowd, which was finally beginning to disperse. The normal noise of the atrium slowly trickling back. But the atmosphere was different. The air itself felt charged, like after a summer thunderstorm. The guy with the clipboard was still there. He looked almost dazed. That was a professor? He asked. Yes. He let out a low whistle, shaking his head. Look, I'm really sorry about before. That was stupid of me. I just thought. It's okay, she said, and she found that she meant it. His simple, dismissive request had been the push she needed, the shove off the cliff. In a strange way, she was grateful to him. Is there? I mean, we're doing this charity thing all week, he said, stumbling over his words, his earlier smoothness completely gone. If you wanted to, play for real, people would come. We could make it a thing, a proper event. The offer hung in the air, a real performance, for a charity. It was a good offer, a kind one. The old fear whispered in her ear. Asterisk, too soon. Too big. You'll freeze. Asterisk, she looked at the professor's card in her hand. She looked at the piano keys, still warm from her touch. She thought about the feeling of the music moving through her, the terrible, wonderful freedom of it. I need to think, she said honestly. But thank you, really. He seemed to understand. Sure, of course. Well, I'll be around. You know where to find us. He gave her an awkward little wave and walked back to his group, who immediately surrounded him, talking in excited, hushed tones. Throwing glances her way, she was alone at the piano again. But she didn't feel alone, and she didn't feel the need to hide. She carefully lowered the fallboard, covering the keys. The act felt ceremonial, like closing a book after finishing a powerful chapter. She stood up. Her legs held her. She picked up the gray scarf from the floor and laid it neatly back on the end of the bench, for its owner-defying dot, as she turned to walk back to her alcove to get her things. People smiled at her. A couple she didn't know gave her small nods. There was no pressure in their looks, Just a simple human recognition. Asterisk, we saw you. You were amazing. Asterisk. She gathered her notebook and her bag from the corner table. The alcove felt different now, too. It wasn't a hiding place anymore. It was just a spot where she'd been sitting. Instead of heading straight back to the library, she walked out the main doors of the atrium. She needed air. She needed to be somewhere quiet, but not the kind of quiet that meant hiding. She found a bench under a bare-branched tree on the quad. The late afternoon sun was breaking through the clouds, casting long golden shadows. She sat down and took out the professor's card. She read his name again. She traced the raised lettering with her thumb. A year ago, an offer like this would have filled her with dread. It would have felt like a demand, a door back into a world of expectations she couldn't meet. But now, it felt like an invitation. A quiet, open door. Asterisk, whenever you are ready. We'll just talk. Asterisk, she wasn't ready to walk through it yet. Not today. The emotions of the last hour were still swirling inside her, too big to sort out. But for the first time in a very long time, she could imagine being ready someday. The path hadn't disappeared when she left the conservatory. It had just gotten overgrown. Today, she had taken a massive, clearing swipe at the weeds. She put the card safely in the inner pocket of her bag. She leaned back on the bench and looked up at the sky. Now streaked with pink and orange dot, she thought about the music. Not the fear that had surrounded it, but the music itself. The way the low chords had vibrated in her chest. The way the sad melody had felt like speaking a language she'd almost forgotten. The sheer physical joy of her hands, knowing exactly what to do. She hadn't played for the crowd. She hadn't played for the guy with the clipboard. She had played for that feeling. And she had found it again. A small, real smile touched her lips. It was a tired smile, but it was her own. She still had to go back to the library. She still had to finish her shift, reshelving books in the quiet, familiar aisles. Her life hadn't magically changed. She wasn't suddenly a concert pianist again, but something fundamental had shifted. The silence inside her was gone. It had been filled with sound, her own sound. She got up from the bench, slung her bag over her shoulder, and started walking across the quad. The air was cool and clean on her face. With each step, she felt a little lighter. She wasn't running away from anything. She was just walking. And for now, that was more than enough. The library was its usual self. A deep, carpeted quiet, broken only by the soft tap of keyboards, the rustle of a page turning, and the distant, rolling squeak of a book cart. The air smelled of old paper and dust, a smell that had become a comfort to her. She slipped behind the help desk, her coworker giving her a nod before heading off on his break. For a while, everything was normal. She answered a few questions about where to find the sociology journals. She checked out a stack of novels for a smiling older student. She reshelved a trolley full of returned history books, her fingers tracing the familiar spines, placing them in their correct order on the shelf. The routine was soothing. It let her mind drift, but it didn't drift to its usual worried corners. It drifted back to the piano, to the feeling of the bench under her, the solid resistance of the keys, the wave of sound that had come from her own hands. A little shiver, part nerves and part excitement, would run through her every time she thought of the applause. Not the noise of it, but the warmth. They hadn't been clapping for a perfect robot. They had been clapping for the feeling she put into the notes. They had felt it too. A student approached the desk, a shy-looking first year. Excuse me? She looked up, ready to help. The student's eyes widened a little. Oh, you're the one from the atrium. With the piano. She felt a flush creep up her neck. So, it was starting. She managed a small smile. Yeah, that was me. That was. I don't really know classical music, the student said quickly, as if apologizing. But it was the most beautiful thing I've ever heard. It made me want to cry, but in a good way. Thank you. The student hurried off before she could even reply, clutching a laptop to their chest. She stood there for a moment, stunned. The thanks echoed in the quiet. It wasn't about skill. It was about connection. She had connected. The rest of her shift passed in a gentle, strange haze. A few more people who had been in the atrium recognized her. An older professor winked at her as she scanned his books. Her supervisor, a no-nonsense woman with kind eyes, paused while sorting a returns list. "Heard you caused quite a stir over in the main building," she said, not looking up. "Good for you." That was all. But it was enough. When her shift ended, she walked out into the evening. The campus was bathed in the blue-gray light that comes just before full dark. Street lamps flickered on, creating pools of gold on the pathways. Instead of heading straight to her small apartment, she found her feet turning, taking the long way around. The way that passed by the music department building got. It was an older building, made of dark stone, with tall, narrow windows. At night, some of the windows were lit from within. As she walked slowly past, she could hear it. Not one sound, but a tangled tapestry of them. From a ground floor window, the repetitive, frustrating scales of a beginner's violin. From somewhere high up, the rich, mellow sound of a saxophone working through a jazz riff. And then, clear as a bell from a practice room with its window slightly ajar, the rapid, intricate passages of a Chopin etude. Someone was in there, working, struggling, practicing. The sound didn't make her feel jealous or anxious. It made her feel a deep, aching sense of kinship. These were her people. This was the sound of the struggle. The beautiful, frustrating, lonely, and glorious work of making music. She had run from that struggle. But hearing it now, from the outside, she missed it. She missed being part of that world of sound. She stood there in the gathering dark, listening, until the Chopin piece came to an end. There was a pause, and then it started again from the beginning, a little smoother this time. She walked on, the professor's card a quiet weight in her bag. Asterisk, 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 the next few days were quiet on the surface. She went to work. She shelved books. She made simple meals in her apartment. But underneath, everything was different. The silence inside her wasn't an empty, fearful one anymore. It was a listening silence. It was filled with the memory of the music she had made and the quiet, persistent call of the music she could still make. She didn't go to see the professor. Not yet. She needed to be sure. She needed to come back to the piano on her own terms, completely alone. So, 2 days later, very early in the morning before her shift, she went back to the atrium. The sun was just coming up, staining the high windows pink and orange. The space was utterly empty. No students, no coffee cart, no buzz of conversation. Just the clean morning light and the grand piano waiting in the center. Her heart beat faster as she walked toward it. This was the real test. Without an audience, without a request, without any reason at all, would the magic still be there? Or would the fear come back? She sat on the bench. It was cool. She adjusted it, the familiar scrape echoing in the empty hall. She opened the fallboard. She let her hands rest on the keys. Cool and smooth. She was scared. But she was also curious. She decided to start with something simple. Not chopsticks, but a gentle, flowing piece by batch. It was pure structure, like a beautiful mathematical equation. Her hands remembered. The notes came, clean and precise. The sound filled the empty atrium, clear and lonely and perfect. No one was there to hear it but her. And that was okay. She played it for the joy of the patterns, for the satisfaction of her hands doing what they knew so well. When she finished, she took a deep breath. The fear was still there, but it was smaller. It was just a feeling, not a command. Then she let herself play the Rachmaninoff again. Just the first page. The stormy opening. In the empty space, it sounded even more powerful, more personal. It was her storm now. She owned it. She played it not to prove anything, not to conquer anything, but just to feel its power again. And she did. She stopped before the sad middle section. That was enough for today. She had come back. She had played for herself. And it had been good. She closed the piano lid gently. As she turned to leave, she saw a janitor pushing a wide broom far across the floor. He had stopped his work and was just leaning on his broom handle, listening. When he saw her look, he gave her a thumbs up and a grin, then went back to his sweeping. Another connection, silent and simple. Asterisk, 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 a week after the atrium performance, she finally felt ready. She put on a clean sweater, tucked the professor's card into her pocket, and walked to his office during his posted office hours. The door was open. He was sitting at a desk buried under piles of books and sheet music. He was scribbling notes in a margin, a pair of glasses perched on the end of his nose. He looked up when she appeared in the doorway. For a second, he didn't recognize her. Then his eyes cleared, and a warm, genuine smile spread across his face. He took off his glasses. "You came," he said. It sounded like he'd been hoping she would, but hadn't been sure. "I came," she said. "Sit, please." He cleared a stack of scores off a chair for her. She sat, her hands folded in her lap. He didn't bombard her with questions. He just waited. "I think?" She started, her voice quiet but steady. "I think I'd like to talk about music again." He nodded slowly. "Good. That's a very good place to start." He leaned back in his chair. "We can talk about it all you like. But you know, at some point, if you want, talking has to become playing again, in a way that doesn't feel like a prison." "I know," she said. And she did. I played again. Just for me. In the empty atrium. His smile deepened. Even better. That's the most important audience. They talked for an hour. Not about her past at the conservatory. Not about pressure or failure. They talked about Rachmaninoff's life. They talked about the difference between technical perfection and emotional truth in music. He lent her a book of essays by a pianist she admired. It felt easy. It felt like breathing air she hadn't realized she'd been missing out as she got up to leave. He said, "The practice rooms in this building are open to all students. And to friends of the department. The one at the end of the third-floor hall has the best light. And a decent piano." He handed her a small temporary access card. "No expectations. Just if you want a place to play. Somewhere a little more private than an atrium." She took the card. It felt like a key. Not to a castle, but to a small, quiet room of her own. "Thank you," she said, and she meant it with her whole heart. She left his office and walked down the hall. She could hear the sounds of practice coming from behind closed doors, a flute, a singer vocalizing, the faint thump of a drum. Instead of feeling like an outsider, she felt like she was walking back into a neighborhood she used to live in. It was familiar. It was coming home. She didn't go to the practice room that day, but she knew it was there. The path wasn't a scary, steep cliff anymore. It was just a path with a door she could open whenever she chose. That night, back in her apartment, she took the simple, black music notebook out of the bottom of her closet, the one she hadn't opened in over a year. She opened it to a blank page. She didn't write any notes. She just wrote the date, and underneath it, in her own handwriting, she wrote, "I played today." It was a small sentence, but it was the start of a new story. The masterpiece she had revealed in the atrium wasn't just the Rachmaninoff. It was herself. And she was finally ready to begin the next movement.